Hello, welcome to Sleep with Stories. Tonight, we journey to a place where the air is thick with beeswax and whispers, where silken tapestries soften the stone walls of a citadel, and where even the most fleeting glance can carry the weight of an entire lifetime. If you enjoy being carried into these quiet worlds of imagination, don't forget to like this story and subscribe, so you'll always have a gentle escape waiting for you at the end of your day. Now, let us begin. The year was 1342, and the great hall of Ethelberg Citadel pulsed with the low hum of courtly chatter. Gold light flickered across polished stone, spilling over velvet gowns and jeweled hands, yet beneath all the opulence lay a current of monotony. The same ritual repeated day after day in the far corner. Winifred Caldwell, only 22, adjusted the embroidered tapestry upon her lap. The silken threads, bright and familiar beneath her fingers, were a comfort against the staleness of endless conversations around her. She appeared serene, her head bowed in concentration, though her thoughts wandered far beyond the blooming roses she coaxed from the fabric. Across the hall, Aaron Atherton, 28, bent low over a heavy oak table. His fingers brushed across dusty scrolls, aligning parchment with quiet diligence. But beneath the veil of routine, his hand lingered over a ciphered ledger, its worn cover partially hidden beneath another. And then, only for a heartbeat, their eyes met. A glance so swift, so delicate, it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. Yet in that instant, a silent discourse passed between them, rich as poetry. Winifred's hand trembled, pausing over the tapestry. Aaron shifted the ledger by the smallest fraction, a movement only she would notice. It was their language, woven knots of words, but of moments that slipped between one heartbeat and the next dot. To any other courtier, it was as if nothing had happened. The air remained heavy with small talk, the drone of politics and fashion filling the hall. But within Winifred's chest, her heart fluttered like a moth against glass. A simple glance and, yet it felt like treason, a dangerous secret whispered in the heart of the fortress. She forced her face to remain composed, serene, even as her mind raced. Around her, courtiers prattled on, too consumed with their own intrigues to notice. And still, she felt the weight of invisible eyes. For in Ethelberg, danger did not come in the form of daggers, but in the ceaseless surveillance of gossiping mouths and watching glances. Aaron, too, bore the invisible chains. His days were spent among scrolls and ink, the scriptoria of Sanctus Lux, his quiet refuge. Yet even there, as he copied the chronicles of kings and the dry records of harvests, his thoughts drifted toward Winifred. Each remembered detail became its own kind of scripture: the auburn fall of her hair, the poised stillness of her hands, the flicker of defiance that glimmered in her gaze. Every stitch of her embroidery, every curve of his pen became part of a silent rhythm, a hidden music only they could hear. And then, one ordinary day, an extraordinary moment arrived. Aaron entered the antechamber of the Royal Accounting Office, arms laden with ledgers. His step faltered on a worn stool, and one book slipped sliding across the polished floor to rest at Winifred's feet. She bent to retrieve it, graceful, composed, as though this were no accident at all. "Oh, Master Atherton," she murmured, her voice soft as silk. "Are you quite all right?" Aaron knelt, his hand brushing hers as he reached for the fallen ledger. The contact was so fleeting, it might have been imagined. Yet to them, it was everything. Winifred's thumb pressed against the cover, ever so slightly marking an almost invisible knot in the leather. A signal, a secret invitation. "Meet me in the scriptoria tomorrow, after the evening meal." Aaron's heart lurched, though his voice remained calm. "A sound suggestion, Lady Caldwell," he replied gently. "The light is particularly fine at that hour." And so the ledger returned to his hands, and the moment passed. Winifred lowered her gaze to her tapestry once more, her face serene, her fingers steady. The world around them never noticed, but beneath the silence, a story had begun, woven not in the open, but in the secret spaces between words. So close your eyes now, dear listener, and let the hush of Ethelberg's stone halls surround you. Imagine the flicker of candlelight, the rustle of silk, and the secret weight of a glance shared across a crowded room. Let it carry you away like the soft drift of embroidery thread, or the slow turning of a vellum page. For even in the quietest corners, love and courage. Winifred's fingers, poised over a particularly intricate section of the tapestry, paused for a beat that stretched into an eternity. Though to any observer it was but a breath, the faint, almost imperceptible shift of her own hand, a fleeting adjustment of the ledger's weight, was her silent echo. Their shared glance had been a thread, pulled taut across the cavernous expanse of the great hall, unseen by the dozens of preening courtiers and gossiping ladies. It was a language spoken in the milliseconds between one polite platitude and the next, a secret world unfolding beneath the thin veneer of courtly decorum. She forced her gaze back to the vibrant silk she was coaxing into a blooming rose, her heart a frantic moth against her ribs. The air in Ethelberg's citadel, usually so heavy with stale expectation and the faint scent of beeswax and ambition, now thrummed with a nervous energy that was entirely her own. How utterly absurd! A simple exchange of glances, no more than that, yet it felt like a declaration, a whispered treason in the very heart of the royal fortress. The sheer, suffocating effort of maintaining her placid expression was exhausting. Every muscle in her face felt tight, locked into a mask of serene indifference. She could feel the imaginary weight of eyes on her, though she knew no one was truly looking. Everyone was too engrossed in their own petty intrigues, or, more likely, their own crushing boredom. Across the hall, Aaron felt the familiar prickle of a courtier's mild disinterest, a far more effective shield than any physical barrier. He straightened slowly, his back protesting the long hours spent hunched over parchment. The ledger, still warm from his touch, felt like a live thing in his hands, buzzing with the unspoken conversation it had just witnessed. He placed it carefully back on the table, aligning it with a dozen others. His mind, usually a quiet, ordered repository of facts and figures, was now a chaotic whirl of sensation. The exact shade of Winifred's auburn hair, the faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted her embroidery, the surprising depth of her dark, observant eyes. It was madness, utter, unmitigated madness. He, a humble keeper of scrolls, a mere shadow in the grand theatre of the court, dared to entertain such a thought, such a feeling, for a lady of her standing. The implications were not grand, tragic romance, but mundane ruin, a swift, unceremonious dismissal, perhaps a quiet banishment to some forgotten provincial scriptorium, or worse, the kind of quiet, suffocating disappearance that erased a person from memory. For her, the consequences would be far more dire. A forced marriage, an arranged retreat to a convent, a life of quiet regret within monastic walls. The very thought chilled him, a stark reminder of the cold, unyielding system that governed their lives. The following days bled into one another with the relentless, unvarying pace of a medieval court. Every morning brought the same elaborate ritual of dressing, the same tasteless gruel for breakfast, the same tedious procession to the great hall for endless, stifling conversation. Winifred would sit with the other ladies, her needle flying through the fabric of her tapestry, each stitch a small act of defiance against the monotony. She listened to the vapid chatter about the latest fashions, the health of distant relatives, the interminable discussions of harvest yields. Her mind, however, was a labyrinth of calculations. When would Aaron next be in the great hall? What duty might bring him near? How could she orchestrate even the briefest, most innocuous exchange without drawing the slightest notice? The watchful eyes of bored courtiers were everywhere. Lady Beatrice, with her perpetually pinched expression, and an uncanny knack for appearing whenever a quiet conversation seemed to be brewing, was a constant threat. Sir Gareth, a man whose sole purpose seemed to be the cataloguing of every minor infraction, from a poorly tied shoelace to a slightly too loud sneeze, was another. Even the servants, seemingly invisible as they moved through the halls, possessed an acute awareness born of years of observing the nobility. A misplaced glance, a lingering smile, a voice a fraction to softeny of these could be interpreted, exaggerated, and disseminated through the court's efficient gossip network within hours. The true horror wasn't a vengeful king, but the suffocating weight of social propriety enforced by 1,000 unseen observers. Aaron, too, navigated this treacherous landscape. His days were spent primarily in the scriptoria of Sanctus Lux, a quiet wing within the citadel. It was a haven of sorts, filled with the comforting scent of aged parchment and dust, where the only sounds were the scratching of quills and the rustle of turning pages. He spent hours meticulously copying ancient texts, auditing ledgers, and organizing archives. This work, while dry and intellectually demanding, offered a peculiar kind of freedom. He could lose himself in the precise lines of a chronicle, allowing his thoughts to drift to Winifred. He found himself cataloguing every fleeting encounter, every almost glance, every shared breath in the crowded hall. He began to plan, with the careful precision of a cartographer mapping unknown lands, the opportunities for their next, equally unremarkable interaction. The first true opportunity presented itself during the thrice-weekly audit of the Royal Granary records. It was a task so numbingly dull that most courtiers went out of their way to avoid even being in the same wing as the clerks performing it. Winifred, however, had discovered a quiet corner near the window in the antechamber outside the main accounting office, a place where she could sit and embroider, ostensibly to catch the better light, but in truth to be near the faint possibility of Aaron passing by. Aaron arrived, a stack of heavy leather-bound ledgers cradled in his arms. He nodded politely to the few clerks present, his face a mask of weary diligence. He knew Winifred was there, even before he saw her. He could feel her presence, a subtle shift in the air, a faint scent of lavender that was uniquely hers. His heart began a slow, deliberate thrum against his ribs. This was it, the moment. He approached the long oak table designated for the clerks, its surface scarred by centuries of use. As he reached it, his foot, seemingly by accident, caught on the worn leg of a stool. The stack of ledgers teetered. His arms swung out as if to catch them, but one, a slim, dark volume, marked Granary. Returns, Autumn 1341, slipped from his grasp. It fell with a soft thud, sliding across the polished floor directly towards Winifred's feet. Winifred looked up, feigning mild surprise. "Oh, Master Atherton," she said, her voice a low murmur, just loud enough to be polite, too soft to carry beyond. the immediate vicinity. "Are you quite all right?" She bent gracefully, her embroidered tapestry sliding off her lap onto the floor, momentarily obscuring her hands from view. Aaron knelt, feigning chagrin. "My apologies, Lady Caldwell." A clumsy moment. As he reached for the fallen ledger, his fingers brushed hers, a contact so fleeting it might have been imagined. "The weight of these numbers, you see, quite unbalances a man." His voice was a quiet hum, a carefully cultivated blend of professional courtesy and mild self-deprecation. Winifred retrieved the ledger, her fingers brushing his again as she handed it back. Her eyes, meeting his for a split second, held a spark of something profound, a shared understanding that belied the mundane words. "Perhaps a moment of rest, Master Atherton. Even the most diligent scholar requires respite." And then, so quick that no one could have possibly seen it, her thumb moved, pressing a small, almost invisible knot on the cover of the ledger. It was a familiar signal, one they had devised through trial and error over weeks of silent observation and subtle cues. It meant, "Meet me in the scriptoria tomorrow, after the evening meal." Aaron's fingers tightened around the ledger. The knot was there, a minuscule irregularity in the smooth leather. His heart gave a lurch, a mixture of exhilaration and dread. "A sound suggestion, Lady Caldwell," he replied, his voice even, though his throat felt tight. "Perhaps I shall. The light in the scriptoria is particularly fine at that hour." This was his confirmation, his acceptance, cloaked in the language of scholarly pursuits. He straightened, offering a polite, almost imperceptible bow, and moved to the table, arranging the ledgers with painstaking slowness. Winifred returned to her embroidery, her face once again a serene mask. To anyone watching, it had been nothing more than a minor mishap, quickly resolved. Between two individuals who rarely interacted, a moment of polite exchange, forgotten as soon as it occurred. Yet, for Winifred and Aaron, it was a triumph, a whispered conversation in a language only they understood, a beacon of connection in a world determined to isolate them. The hours crawled by, each minute an eternity. The evening meal was a particularly tedious affair, filled with the usual courtly gossip and Lord Ashworth's booming pronouncements on the superiority of his hunting dogs. Winifred picked at her capon, her mind racing. She had chosen the for their next meeting for a reason. While seemingly public, its very nature, quiet, scholarly, frequented only by those genuinely engaged in research, made it an unlikely place for idle eavesdropping. The dusty shelves offered a semblance of privacy, and the rustle of pages could mask a whispered word. When the meal finally concluded, Winifred excused herself, with a polite yawn, citing a headache brought on by the evening's rich fare. She retired to her chambers, feigning an early night. But as soon as her maid had extinguished the last lamp and left her to her supposed slumber, Winifred rose. She exchanged her silken nightgown for a dark, unassuming gown that would blend into the shadows, pulling a plain cloak over it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to betray her. She moved with practiced silence, her soft slippers making no sound on the stone floors. The corridors of Ethelberg Citadel were vast and echoing at night, lit only by scattered braziers and the occasional torch. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift. Every creak of the ancient timbers sounded like a footstep. Aaron, too, had made his preparations. He lingered in the scriptoria after the other clerks had departed, ostensibly to finish a pressing task. The scent of old paper and ink was strong, comforting. He tidied his desk, rearranged a few scrolls. his movements deliberate, creating the impression of a man engrossed in his work. He knew the citadel's rhythms, the patrol routes of the night watch, the sleepy habits of the stable boys. The scriptoria was rarely visited after dark, save for the occasional scholar consumed by an obscure text. A faint shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the arched doorway. Winifred, she moved like a whisper, her presence more felt than seen. Aaron's breath caught in his throat. He gestured towards a secluded alcove, half hidden by towering shelves of theological texts. It was a space they had both unconsciously gravitated towards during their daily routines, a silent agreement forming between them about its strategic advantages. "Winifred," Aaron whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the rustle of a distant breeze through an ill-fitting window. "Aaron," she replied, her voice equally hushed, a silken murmur that was both fragile and strong. They stood, separated by the narrow space of the alcove, the air thick with unspoken words. There was no grand declaration, no passionate embroidery. This was not that kind of love. This was the quiet, agonizing effort of existence, of seeking solace, in a world that denied genuine feeling. "The ledger," she began, her eyes scanning the dim shelves around them, as if cataloguing titles. Was it truly important, or merely an excuse? A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Aaron's lips. It was precisely as important as we made it. The figures were, regrettably, entirely accurate. He paused, choosing his words with care. The true import, I believe, lay in the knot. Winifred's gaze met his unwavering. Indeed, a small irregularity, easily overlooked by an untrained eye. Yet, for those who seek meaning, it speaks volumes. She clasped her hands in front of her, posture outwardly demure, but her mind racing. "The monotony, Aaron, .. It suffocates." "It does," he agreed, his voice a low hum. "The very air in this place seems to weigh upon the spirit. The endless banquets, the hollow laughter, the pretense of profound discourse over matters of no consequence. And the surveillance," Winifred added, a note of weariness in her voice. "Every whisper, every glance. One feels constantly observed, like a specimen under a lens." "Precisely," Aaron affirmed. "The court, for all its splendor, is merely a cage with gilded bars. And we, the gilded birds, are expected to sing the same song, day after day, year after year." He looked at her, his scholar's eyes piercing the gloom. "Do you find yourself ... restless?" "Restless," she echoed, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. "More than restless, drained. Each day is a performance, a meticulously choreographed dance to avoid the slightest misstep. My embroidery, once a solace, now feels like another duty, another thread in the tapestry of my expected existence." She gestured vaguely. "The world outside these walls feels like a distant dream, a vibrant painting obscured by a veil of dust." Aaron nodded slowly. "I understand. Here, in the scriptoria, amidst the accumulated wisdom of ages, one finds a different kind of confinement. The answers are all here, written and rewritten. But the questions that truly stir the soul remain unspoken, unacknowledged." He picked up a small, leather-bound volume from a nearby shelf, running his thumb over its worn cover. "This constant pretense ... it drains the spirit, does it not?" "It does," she agreed. "And yet, what alternative is there? A scandal means ruin. For a woman, it means a life of quiet regret within monastic walls, or a forced marriage to some elderly, toothless lord in a forgotten corner of the kingdom. The very thought sent a shiver through her. The walls of a convent are cold, Aaron. Colder than these stone corridors. He put the book back, his gaze fixed on her. And for a man, banishment. A scholar without his books, a steward without his duties. A life without purpose, adrift. His voice was tinged with a quiet resignation. A testament to his understanding of his own precarious position. We are both trapped, Winifred, by the very duties that define us. A silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of their shared predicament. It was not a romantic silence, but one born of grim, exhausting patience. This was the reality of their connection to souls recognizing their mutual imprisonment, finding a sliver of kinship in the shared despair of their circumstances. I have been contemplating, Aaron began, breaking the quiet, a particular problem regarding the forthcoming trade negotiations with Lord Greyjoy's Northern Territories, specifically the proposed exchange rates for pelts and grain. He spoke in a low, measured tone, as if rehearsing a formal report. The current projections, I believe, are overly optimistic regarding the yield from the winter harvest, particularly in the lower valleys. Winifred tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. She knew this was it, the gossamer thread of discourse. A public conversation about a dull, bureaucratic topic, carefully imbued with double meanings. Indeed, Master Atherton, one must always account for unforeseen variables. The true value, after all, lies not merely in the numbers presented, but in the subtle nuances of the land, the temperament of the seasons. She paused, then continued, her voice soft but clear, and perhaps the hidden costs not immediately apparent. On the ledger, Aaron nodded, playing his part. Precisely, the hidden costs. A poor harvest could lead to widespread discontent, a strained alliance, perhaps. One must always consider the long-term implications, the subtle shifts in the landscape that are not immediately visible to the casual observer. He met her eyes, and in that fleeting contact, the hidden message was clear. The danger we face is real. The unforeseen variables are everywhere. We must be even more cautious. Winifred took a small, almost imperceptible breath, and the temperament of the seasons, Master Atherton, can be notoriously fickle. A sudden frost, an unexpected drought, these can alter the most meticulously planned projections. One must learn to read the signs, however faint, however seemingly insignificant. Her subtext was equally potent. We must be vigilant, watch for the smallest signs of trouble, adapt to every change in the climate of the court. Their conversation, so seemingly innocuous, continued for several minutes. They spoke of crop rotations and import duties, of the logistics of transport and the intricacies of taxation. Yet, beneath the dry academic veneer, a rich tapestry of personal messages was being woven. Aaron described the inevitable erosion of soil over time, a veiled reference to the corrosive nature of court life on one's spirit. Winifred responded about the necessity of deep roots to withstand the harshest storms, a quiet affirmation of their shared resilience. They discussed the dangers of over-reliance on a single commodity, a subtle warning against placing all their hopes on one risky interaction. The thrill of it was immense, a quiet, internal tremor that ran through Winifred. To be understood, truly understood, in a world that demanded utter conformity, was a powerful, intoxicating sensation. Yet, it was laced with a chilling fear. What if someone overheard? What if a stray word, a subtle inflection, was interpreted correctly? The thought was enough to make her heart pound. a frantic drum against her ribs. They concluded their covert exchange with a polite, formal agreement on the necessity of further review of the agricultural reports. A most enlightening discussion. Master Atherton, Winifred said, her voice betraying none of the profound connection that had just transpired. Indeed, Lady Caldwell, your insights are, as ever, invaluable. With a silent, mutual understanding, they both retreated from the alcove, melting back into the shadows of the scriptoria. Aaron returned to his desk, picking up a scroll, his mind buzzing with the echoes of their conversation. Winifred slipped out of the scriptoria, moving silently through the dark corridors, back to her chambers. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving her with a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a quiet satisfaction. They had done it. They had found a way to speak, to connect, in the very heart of the silence. The days that followed were a testament to their quiet endurance. The pattern of their interactions became a carefully choreographed dance, each step deliberate, each glance measured. There were the accidental meetings in the courtyard, where a shared observation about the weather would carry a hidden layer of meaning. There were the moments in the great hall where Aaron, standing near the immense fireplace, would trace a specific pattern on the stone with his boot, a silent signal that he would be in the scriptoria at a certain time. Winifred, from across the room, would subtly adjust the angle of her embroidery frame, her acknowledgement equally discreet. The constant threat of discovery loomed, a persistent shadow at the edges of their carefully constructed world. It wasn't just the ever-present eyes of bored courtiers or the sharp ears of servants. It was the entire system itself, designed to crush any deviation from the prescribed path. A courtier, Lady Eleanor, a distant cousin of the Duke, was a prime example. She had been observed sharing what were deemed overly familiar conversations with a visiting merchant, a man of wealth but not of noble birth. The court had watched, titillated by the unfolding drama. There were no dramatic accusations, no public shaming. Instead, Lady Eleanor simply ceased to appear at court. A few weeks later, quiet rumors circulated. She had taken the veil, entering the convent of St. Agnes, a place known for its strict, contemplative order. The monastic path was not merely a threat, it was a quietly enforced reality. A life of quiet regret within monastic walls, her vibrant spirit slowly extinguished by stone and prayer. Winifred heard the whispers, saw the knowing glances exchanged by the other ladies. The subtle warning was not lost on her. She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This was the ultimate unglamorous consequence for forbidden feelings. Not a grand tragedy, but the slow, deliberate erasure of a life. It underscored the suffocating weight of social propriety, a weight that could crush a person without a sound. Aaron, too, was acutely aware of Eleanor's fate. It solidified his own resolve to exercise extreme caution. He spent more time poring over old ledgers, his face etched with feigned concentration, his mind, however, always on Winifred. Their connection was not about fiery passion. It was about the grim, exhausting patience required to exist, unseen, on the edges of a world that simply had no room for genuine, unapproved feeling. It was a testament to how truly boring and restrictive medieval life could be, even for those supposedly in love. Their love story, if one could even call it that, became a slow burn of quiet endurance. There were no declarations, no grand gestures, only the meticulous dance of avoidance and the careful cultivation of subtlety. It was a relationship built on shared silence, on the unspoken understanding that bloomed in the space between duty and desire. They continued to exchange ciphered scrolls, seemingly innocuous scholastic texts or ledgers, passed between them during routine visits to the scriptoria or through the hands of trusted, unwitting pages. A marginal note, a specific date highlighted, a particular word underlined. Each was a fragment of their clandestine communication, a lifeline in the vast ocean of their isolation. Winifred found herself spending more time on her embroidery, not just as a duty, but as a deliberate act of communication. She began to weave tiny, almost imperceptible patterns into the border of her tapestry. A small, stylized wilder rose, a single, carefully placed stone. Motifs that held meaning only for them. These were not grand statements, but minuscule declarations, whispers of her true feelings, hidden in plain sight. One particularly dull afternoon, during a lengthy and entirely uninteresting discussion on the proper methods of preserving salted meats, Winifred glanced up. Aaron was standing by a window, seemingly engrossed in the rain-streaked view of the outer bailey. Their eyes met, not with the initial spark of discovery, but with the quiet, profound understanding of two people who had traversed a perilous landscape together. In that moment, there was no need for words, no need for subtle signals. Their connection had deepened, not into a passionate fire, but into a deep, unshakable root. It was a quiet triumph, a victory of the unseen. They both knew their lives would continue within the suffocating confines of Ethelberg's citadel. There would be no escape, no dramatic rebellion. Their love would remain a secret, a quiet rebellion against a world that had no place for it. It would be a lifetime of subtle gestures, of shared glances across crowded halls, of conversations imbued with double meanings. Their existence would be defined by the relentless tedium of court life. Yet, within that tedium, they had carved out a space, however small, for genuine connection. It was a love measured not in grand passion, but in the grim, exhausting patience of two souls existing, unseen, on the edges of a world that demanded conformity. And in that quiet endurance, they found their own, unglamorous, form of freedom. They would continue their meticulous dance, a silent testament to how even in the most restrictive of cages, the human heart could find a way to beat, however faintly, to its own rhythm. Please like and subscribe for more tales of tedious medieval. COURTSHIPS. The quiet endurance they had found was not a fleeting victory, but a delicate, painstaking foundation for the months that followed. Ethelberg's citadel continued its unyielding rhythm, a vast stone-girded cage that swallowed days whole, regurgitating them as an endless cycle of tedious duties and stifling social obligations. For Winifred, the tapestry on her embroidery frame grew, stitch by meticulous stitch, each silken thread a testament to hours past, to thoughts unuttered, to a private language woven into the fabric. She had become an artist of the imperceptible, her fingers weaving not just patterns, but messages, coded declarations of a spirit that refused to be entirely consumed by courtly dictates. The small, stylized wilder rose, a motif she had subtly introduced into the tapestry's border, was almost invisible to the casual eye. It was nestled amongst conventional floral patterns, its petals a shade too deep, its thorns a whisper too sharp. It was her private symbol for Aaron, a recognition of his surname, Wilder, and a quiet acknowledgement of the untamed spirit she sensed beneath his scholar's demeanor. She would work on it during the endless afternoon gatherings in the solar, where the ladies of the court gossiped over their needlework, their voices a droning hum, their eyes darting, ever watchful. When Aaron would occasionally pass by, summoned by some minor court business, her hand would hover over the wilder rose, a silent communication of her presence, her thoughts. Aaron, in turn, honed his own methods of subtle connection. The scriptoria of Sanctus Lux, a place of comforting dust, and the scent of ancient paper, became their most frequent, albeit indirect, meeting ground. He would often leave a particular ciphered scroll on a specific shelf, tucked slightly askew, or with a corner folded just so. It might be a ledger of grain imports from the previous year, or a dry treatise on monastic land ownership. But within its meticulously copied lines, a hidden message lay. A specific paragraph about the shifting patterns of migratory birds might refer to the changing moods of the court. A note on the careful management of water resources could be a veiled instruction for their next interaction, perhaps concerning the safest time to pass near the central well. The challenge was not just creating the message, but ensuring its retrieval without suspicion. Winifred, armed with unfeigned interest in historical genealogies or the accounts of previous royal treasuries, would occasionally request access to the scriptoria. She would move with deliberate slowness, her movements those of a woman merely indulging a passing intellectual curiosity. Her fingers, light and precise, would brush against the designated scroll, her mind racing as she absorbed the almost imperceptible cues, the subtle indentations, the faint smudges of ink that spoke volumes. The fear of discovery was a constant, icy tendril around her heart. Every rustle of parchment, every creak of the floorboards, every distant cough echoed like a thunderclap in the vast, quiet space. One particularly grueling week brought the annual feast of St. Jude, a mandatory celebration that stretched over 3 days of endless banquets, musical performances, and forced merriment. The court was at its most populous, swollen with minor lords and their retinues, all eager to curry favor or simply to escape the monotony of their own estates. This increased population meant more eyes, more ears, more opportunities for casual observation. Winifred found herself seated at the high table, next to the perpetually garrulous Lord Bromwich, whose booming laughter and endless anecdotes about his hunting exploits grated on her nerves. She picked at her spiced pheasant, her polite smiles aching her jaw. Across the crowded hall, amidst a lesser table of clerks and scholars, she saw Aaron. He was hunched over his plate, seemingly absorbed in conversation with an elderly scribe, his dark hair falling across his brow as he nodded with feigned interest. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. A flicker of mutual weariness, an understanding that no one else could possibly discern in the kaleidoscope of faces. It was a silent conversation. "This is excruciating. We are trapped." And the unspoken reply, "Yes, but we are here, together, in this." Later that evening, during the courtly dances, the pressure intensified. The great hall throbbed with music and the rhythmic shuffle of feet. Winifred was forced to dance with several dull-witted young noblemen, each more preoccupied with his own footwork than with polite conversation. As she moved through a complex promenade, her path intersected briefly with Aaron's. He was positioned near a pillar, ostensibly observing the festivities. As their shoulders almost brushed, Aaron's hand, seemingly by accident, slipped from the small, folded program he was holding. It fluttered to the ground, a tiny slip of parchment amongst the dozens of dancing feet. Winifred, mid-curtsy, with a particularly awkward partner, feigned a slight stumble. Her gloved hand dipped, not quite to the floor, but just enough for her fingers to brush against the discarded program. As she straightened, her eyes met Aaron's, and in that fleeting moment, she gave the barest, almost imperceptible nod. She had seen it, a small, almost invisible dot of ink on the corner of the program. It was a pre-arranged marker, indicating that a specific message was being conveyed, likely via the numerical values of the dancers listed on the program. Aaron, with a polite cough, bent to retrieve the program, his movements unhurried. Their eyes met again, and in that exchange, the message was confirmed. I have seen. I understand. The entire interaction lasted no more than 2 seconds, a blink in the grand tapestry of the feast. Yet for them, it was a precise, dangerous exchange, a heartbeat of connection in the midst of suffocating noise. The shadowy vigil was a constant companion. Lady Beatrice, with her thin lips and perpetually raised eyebrow, seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to appear at the periphery of any seemingly innocent interaction. Sir Gareth, the meticulous cataloguer of minor courtly infractions, was always lurking, his gaze sharp, his memory like an iron trap. Even the pages, young and seemingly innocent, often carried tales to their older counterparts, who in turn might whisper them to their masters. The kitchen staff, the stable hands, the laundresses, all formed an informal network of observers, their livelihoods dependent on knowing the ebb and flow of courtly favor and disfavor. A misplaced glance, a shared smile that lasted a fraction too long, a whispered conversation that momentarily dipped below the audible threshold of polite society. Any of these could be picked apart, embellished, and spread like wildfire through the court's insatiable appetite for gossip. Winifred felt the constant weight of their gaze, a subtle pressure on her shoulders, a tightening in her chest. She had learned to modulate her voice, her expressions, her very breath. Her default expression became one of serene, slightly bored politeness. She practiced her demure curtsies in her chambers, ensuring her movements were flawless, her gaze always respectful, never lingering. It was an exhausting performance, day in and day out, a draining of her vital energy. Every social engagement became a high-stakes game of concealment, where the slightest error could lead to devastating consequences. Aaron, too, lived under this pervasive scrutiny. His role as a scholar provided a certain camouflage. Scholars were expected to be absorbed, somewhat absent-minded. He used this to his advantage, cultivating an air of intellectual preoccupation that discouraged casual conversation. He would walk through the halls with a scroll tucked under his arm, his eyes seemingly fixed on a distant point, his brow furrowed in concentration. This made him less approachable, less likely to be drawn into idle chatter where a slip of the tongue might occur. His very dishevelment, once a minor flaw, now became a useful tool, suggesting a mind too engrossed in higher pursuits to care for mundane appearances. The fear of the monastic path for Winifred was a chilling reality, not an abstract threat. The whispers about Lady Eleanor's disappearance echoed through the court like a haunting refrain. Eleanor had not been disgraced publicly. There had been no royal decree, no formal banishment. She had simply vanished. The polite fiction was that she had felt a sudden, overwhelming call to a spiritual life. Everyone knew it was a lie, a convenient fabrication to hide a less palatable truth. Eleanor's overly familiar conversations with the merchant had been a small breach, easily forgiven if the merchant had been noble, but he was not. And so Eleanor's vibrant spirit was now slowly being extinguished behind the cold stone walls of a convent, her life reduced to quiet contemplation and prayer, a life of endless regret. This subtle yet brutal punishment was far more insidious than a public hanging or a dramatic exile. It was an erasure, a slow death of the soul, a stark reminder that passion, if unsanctioned, had no place in their world. It was a lesson in conformity, delivered with quiet efficiency. Winifred felt the cold dread of it whenever she saw a new nun entering the convent gates from her chamber window, a black shroud of anonymity replacing vibrant silks. The silence here, Winifred whispered to Erin one evening, during one of their rare, brief encounters in a dimly lit antechamber near the main kitchen, a place usually bustling but momentarily deserted during the cook's evening break. She had feigned a desire for a cup of warmed, spiced wine. It is not peaceful. It is ... heavy, full of unspoken things. Aaron, pretending to inspect a leaky cask in the corner, kept his voice low. Indeed, the weight of expectation, the burden of appearances, it presses upon one's very breath. He paused, his eyes darting towards the corridor. Have you felt the scrutiny intensify of late? Winifred nodded almost imperceptibly. Lady Beatrice has taken to sitting nearer to my embroidery circle, and Sir Gareth's cough seems to echo in every corridor I traverse. She sighed, a ghost of a sound. Sometimes I feel as though my very thoughts are being catalogued. They likely are, Erin replied, a dry edge to his voice. Not consciously, perhaps, but the general atmosphere of vigilance breeds a certain paranoia. We are all, in a way, complicit in our own surveillance. We watch each other out of boredom, out of fear, out of a misguided sense of duty. Their conversation was a morbid comfort, a shared burden articulated in hushed tones. They spoke not of grand feelings, but of the logistical challenges of their existence, the mental toll of constant vigilance. This was the true nature of their forbidden love, a partnership in survival, a mutual acknowledgement of the suffocating absurdity of their lives. To cope, Winifred began to expand her use of the embroidered tapestry. Beyond the wilder rose, she wove in other symbols. A specific knot in the thread, visible only to a trained eye, would signify a new question she had for Aaron. A repeated, almost imperceptible stitch pattern would be a response. It became a diary, a confessional, a dialogue woven into silk, held on her lap for hours each day, a testament to her quiet defiance. Aaron, meanwhile, became a master of the ciphered scroll. He would use the most mundane of court documents, lists of provisions, records of repairs to the citadel, inventories of royal assets, to embed his messages. He had devised a system based on the frequency of certain letters in the Latin alphabet, or by highlighting specific words that, when read consecutively across different pages, formed a coherent thought. It was painstaking work, requiring hours of meticulous planning and execution. But the brief, stolen moments of connection, the profound relief of being understood, were worth the effort. One cold, dreary afternoon in late autumn, the court was gathered for a lengthy session of petitions. Peasants from the outlying villages, their faces drawn and anxious, presented their grievances before the royal council. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and unwashed bodies, a stark contrast to the usual perfumed air of the court. Winifred, seated near the Queen, stifled a yawn. The petitions dragged on, each more depressing than the last, detailing crop failures, bandit raids, and the injustices of local lords. Aaron was present, positioned near the council clerks, his task to record the decisions and directives issued by the council. His quill scratched rhythmically on the parchment, an almost hypnotic sound. During a particularly dull monologue from a village elder about the depredations of a wild boar, Aaron caught Winifred's eye. It was not the fading gaze of their first encounter, but something deeper, more profound. It was a glance of shared suffering, of mutual boredom, of the sheer unyielding tedium of their lives. In that glance, Aaron subtly shifted the angle of his ledger, a heavy, leather-bound volume of past legal precedents. His thumb moved, almost imperceptibly, tracing a specific, barely visible imperfection on the cover. It was a pattern Winifred instantly recognized, a signal they had established for moments of intense, unavoidable public scrutiny. It meant the risk is high. Be extra vigilant. Our connection is felt, even if unseen. Winifred's heart gave a faint flutter. She nodded, her head tilted slightly as if considering. The old man's plight, her hand resting on the embroidered tapestry in her lap, moved. Her index finger pressed gently against the small, wilder rose she had woven, a silent affirmation. I understand. I am vigilant. I am with you. The exchange was flawless, a dance of micro-movements, of shared understanding that transcended words. No one noticed. The courtiers were too busy stifling their own yawns, or subtly shifting in their seats. The petitioners were too engrossed in their pleas. The council members were too bored to observe anything beyond the most blatant infractions. This was the genius of their method, hiding in plain sight, leveraging the very boredom and self-absorption of the court against itself. As the days shortened and winter drew in, the court became even more insular, more prone to gossip and petty intrigues. The threat of the monastic path felt closer, more tangible. Another minor noblewoman, Lady Isolde, known for her spirited disposition and penchant for bold colors, was suddenly withdrawn from court after a series of spirited debates with an older, unmarried duke. The rumor mill churned. She had expressed opinions deemed unseemly for a maiden of her station. Within weeks, the whispers confirmed her fate, a distant, strict convent in the northern marshes, far from the influence of her family. Her punishment was not for a forbidden love, but for forbidden thoughts, for the transgression of possessing a mind too independent for the court's rigid expectations. Winifred felt a chill colder than the winter air outside. If independent thought could condemn a woman, what chance did genuine, unapproved feeling have? The court was a finely tuned machine, designed to grind down any individuality, any deviation. It wasn't about moral outrage. It was about order, about maintaining the suffocating weight of social propriety. Yet, despite the omnipresent fear, a quiet determination solidified within Winifred and Aaron. Their connection was not a fleeting infatuation. It was a deeply rooted necessity. It was the only genuine thing in their lives, a small, vibrant flame in a world of muted colors. They drew strength from it, from the knowledge that they were not alone in their quiet despair. Aaron, in the depths of the scriptoria, found a new solace. He began to subtly alter some of the older, rarely consulted chronicles, not major historical facts, but small, almost imperceptible changes. A slight rephrasing of a paragraph about a past king's wise alliances to strategic, if uninspired, arrangements. A marginal note about a long-dead noblewoman's pious devotion was subtly changed to imply a life of quiet endurance. These were not messages for Winifred directly, but an act of rebellion, a way to inject his own truth into the cold, historical record, to carve out a sliver of personal agency in a world that denied it. Winifred, in turn, dedicated herself to a new section of her tapestry. It was a landscape, ostensibly a depiction of the citadel's surrounding lands, but she imbued it with deeper meaning. The winding river was her hidden path of communication. The distant, shadowed mountains were the ever-present dangers, and hidden amongst the trees, almost lost in the intricate embroidery, she began to stitch two tiny, indistinct figures, standing, close but not touching, facing the same horizon. It was them, in their silent defiance, existing on the edges of a world that had no room for them. Their love story was never about grand passion. It was about grim, exhausting patience. It was about the meticulous dance of avoidance, the precise timing of a glance, the coded language of a dropped ledger or a ciphered scroll. It was a testament to how truly boring and restrictive medieval life could be, even for those supposedly. In love, there would be no escape, no dramatic elopement, no grand declarations. Their lives would continue within the suffocating confines of Ethelberg Citadel, defined by duty and surveillance. But within that tedium, they had forged something real, a connection measured not in stolen kisses, but in shared silences, in the profound relief of being truly seen by another. It was a love that existed in the space between the lines of a ledger, in the subtle shift of a tapestry, in the knowing flicker of an eye across a crowded, indifferent hall. They had found their own, unglamorous form of freedom, the freedom of two souls, unseen and unheard by the world, beating to their own quiet, resilient rhythm, together. Their existence was a quiet rebellion, a testament to the enduring power of genuine feeling, even when confined to the smallest, most secret corners of a tightly controlled world. And in that quiet endurance, they found a satisfaction deeper than any fleeting romance could offer, a profound, enduring kinship against the backdrop of an unromantic age. Their story was the subtle strength of two hearts, beating quietly in unison, a whispered melody against the endless drone of the court. The subtle strength of two hearts, beating quietly in unison, a whispered melody against the endless drone of the court was their only shield. As winter's grip tightened around Ethelberg Citadel, transforming its courtyards into icy plains and its halls into echoing, drafty tunnels, the monotony of court life became even more oppressive. The days blurred into an indistinguishable cycle of formalized meals, endless hours of needlework for the ladies, and tedious administrative duties for the scholars. This relentless routine, designed to maintain order and quell any hint of individualism, inadvertently became the very fabric into which Winifred and Erin wove their quiet rebellion. Winifred found herself spending increasingly long hours over her embroidery frame. The tapestry, a vibrant, intricate landscape of the citadel's imagined environs, became her sanctuary, a place where her true thoughts could exist, coded and hidden. The tiny wilder rose she had woven for Aaron was now surrounded by other symbolic flora, a delicate, almost invisible fern representing resilience, a small, intertwined knot of ivy speaking of enduring connection. Each stitch was a minute act of defiance, a silent conversation with herself and with him. Her needle moved with practiced grace, a public performance of demure industry, while her mind charted pathways through the silken threads, mapping out unspoken desires and fears. She often felt the gaze of Lady Beatrice upon her, a cool, appraising stare that seemed to pierce through the layers of her composure. Winifred would merely lower her head slightly, her fingers continuing their rhythmic dance, her expression one of pleasant concentration. The trick was to be utterly unremarkable, a perfectly sculpted figure of courtly propriety. Aaron, too, refined his methods of subtle communication. The scriptoria of Sanctus Lux, with its hushed reverence for forgotten knowledge, remained their primary, if indirect, nexus. He started to use the marginalia of less frequented texts, scribbling seemingly innocuous notes that, when combined with a predetermined page number or a specific character count within a sentence, would reveal a hidden meaning. A treatise on the historical prices of grain might contain a carefully underlined phrase. The market demands patience for its true yield, which, for Winifred, translated to exercise extreme caution. The court's vigilance is unusually high this week. These were not simple messages, but complex, multi-layered communiques, requiring a shared understanding of their intricate code, built piece by piece over months of quiet observation and dangerous experimentation. The constant threat of discovery had forged in them a shared discipline, a heightened awareness of every shadow, every hushed voice, every lingering glance. It was a mental chess game, played out daily against unseen opponents. The shadowy vigil was not merely a concept, it was a living, breathing entity. The scullery maids, often privy to the most unguarded moments of courtly life, possessed an uncanny knack for absorbing and disseminating whispers. The stable hands, while tending to the horses, might overhear snippets of conversation from passing riders. Even the young pages, darting through corridors on errands, often registered more than they let on, their innocent eyes absorbing details that could later be pieced together by their more worldly elders. The court itself was a single, vast, interconnected ear, constantly attuned to any deviation from the prescribed norm. One particularly tense morning, the arrival of a new royal overseer of accounts, Master Theron Blackwood, cast a fresh pall over the court. Blackwood was a man of meticulous habits, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a mind that thrived on order and efficiency. He took a particular interest in the scriptoria, demanding detailed inventories of every scroll and ledger, a task that brought him into frequent, uncomfortable proximity with Aaron. Blackwood's presence amplified the existing tension, transforming the scriptoria from a quiet refuge into a potential trap. Aaron had to be even more circumspect, his movements precise, his expressions carefully neutral as he catalogued and recatalogued ancient texts under the watchful eye of the new overseer. This heightened scrutiny meant their more direct methods of communication became almost impossible. The dropped glove, the shared glance across a crowded room, these were too risky now. Their connection retreated further into the realm of the abstract, relying on the established system of the tapestry and the ciphered scrolls. Winifred felt the strain keenly. The days stretched, each hour a battle against the gnawing anxiety. She would find herself gripping her needle so tightly her knuckles ached, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of her tapestry, willing her thoughts to remain as hidden as the tiny symbols she wove into its threads. The boredom, once a dull ache, now felt like a suffocating blanket, pressing down on her spirit. Yet beneath it, a steel-like resolve solidified. She would not break, she would not yield. During a particularly drawn-out courtly assembly, a review of the annual grain yields from the ducal lands, Aaron found an opportunity to engage in a gossamer thread of discourse. The air in the great hall was stale, thick with the scent of beeswax and old wool. Winifred was seated near the Queen, her posture impeccable, her eyes fixed on the speaker, a portly duke droning on about soil quality. Aaron, positioned at the edge of the assembly, ostensibly taking notes, caught her eye during a momentary lull. Indeed, the challenge lies not in the quantity of the harvest, but in the quality of its distribution, Aaron stated, his voice clear but modulated, ostensibly. Addressing a junior clerk beside him, his gaze flickered towards Winifred for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible widening of his eyes. One must consider the hidden pathways through which the grain travels, ensuring its safe passage to those who truly require it, without drawing undue attention to the transfer. Winifred, without turning her head, gave the barest tilt of her chin, a gesture that seemed to indicate polite agreement with the Duke's tedious pronouncements. But her mind raced, processing Erin's words. Hidden pathways, a clear reference to their communication. Safe passage, without drawing undue attention. A warning about the increased surveillance. She felt a surge of cold dread, then a flicker of grim satisfaction. He had delivered a complex message under the very noses of the entire court. Later, that day, she received confirmation. A small, seemingly ordinary ledger containing the monthly accounts of the royal stables appeared on her chamber table. It had been left by a junior page, ostensibly for her review, as she sometimes assisted the Queen with minor administrative tasks. As she idly flipped through the pages, her fingers brushed against a specific entry: feed for the King's prize stallion, Bayard, for the first fortnight of winter. The number 7 was subtly underlined. She knew Erin's code. 7 was the numerical value for danger. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The message was explicit. Danger is immediate and present. The source of this heightened danger remained unknown, a phantom menace that tightened the invisible noose around them. Was it Master Blackwood? Had one of their subtle exchanges been noticed? Had a servant's idle gossip taken root? The not knowing was almost worse than knowing. It fueled a pervasive paranoia, an endless loop of self-doubt and heightened vigilance. The spectre of the monastic path loomed larger than ever. Rumors, sharp and cold as winter winds, began to circulate about Lady Philippa, a distant cousin of Winifred's. Philippa had always been known for her vivacious spirit, her love of laughter, and a rather unladylike fondness for falconry. She had been seen, on more than one occasion, engaged in lively, often boisterous, conversation with a younger, unmarried captain of the guard. No explicit impropriety had been witnessed, no scandalous trysts, but her laughter had been too loud, her eyes too bright, her independent spirit too undeniable for the court's strictures. The whispers had grown from murmurs to a steady hum. Then, abruptly, Philippa was gone. The official explanation was, of course, a sudden, profound spiritual awakening and a desire to dedicate her life to God in a distant convent. Winifred knew better. She felt the cold dread that her own cousin, vibrant and full of life, had been slowly extinguished. Her spirit caged within silent stone walls, a stark and chilling testament to the court's brutal efficiency in enforcing conformity. Winifred found herself staring out her chamber window more often, watching the somber figures of new novices entering the convent gates, their colorful gowns replaced by the stark black habit. Each new arrival was a fresh reminder of her own precarious position, a silent warning of the unglamorous end that awaited those who dared to feel too deeply or simply to be too much themselves. Their communication became a desperate lifeline, a defiant whisper against the suffocating silence. Erin began to leave small, almost invisible marks on the spines of books he had just returned to the scriptoria shelves, a barely perceptible scratch, a faint smudge of ink, a tiny chip in the wood. Each mark corresponded to a specific message. Safe to speak briefly here tomorrow, a warning. I long for clarity. Winifred would occasionally browse the shelves, her gloved finger tracing the spines, her eyes scanning for these minute alterations, her heart quickening with a mixture of fear and profound relief. One rare afternoon, A particularly heavy snowfall led to the cancellation of most court duties. The citadel felt quieter, muffled by the snow. Winifred, feigning a need to consult an ancient herbal remedy for a persistent cough, found herself in a rarely used antechamber near the physician's quarters, which led, via a convoluted back staircase, to a lesser-used entrance to the scriptoria. She knew Erin was often there during these quiet hours. The air was frigid, smelling faintly of old herbs and dust. As she made her way through the antechamber, she heard a soft rustling sound from a shadowed corner. Erin emerged, a scroll tucked under his arm, his dark hair falling over his brow, a faint smudge of ink on his cheek. He had clearly been deep in his work. For a fleeting moment, they were utterly alone, cloaked by the heavy silence of the snow and the forgotten corners of the citadel. "Winifred," he murmured, his voice barely a breath, but clear in the quiet. His eyes, usually guarded, held a profound weariness. The silence is a deceptive thing today. It merely amplifies the unspoken threats. "Indeed," Winifred replied, her voice equally soft, a tremor she hoped he wouldn't notice. She clutched the imaginary herbal book to her chest. The weight of anticipation is often heavier than the burden itself. She paused, then added, "Lady Philippa, the whispers are confirmed." Aaron's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask for clarification. He knew the cost of deviation. "Another life consumed by the dictates of decorum," he said, a bitter edge to his tone. "The court does not punish transgression. It punishes anything that dares to breathe too freely." He shifted the scroll in his hand, almost imperceptibly. "I fear the new overseer, Blackwood, has an unnerving interest in the scriptorious accounts. He sees patterns where none should exist. And Sir Gareth," Winifred added, referring to the meticulous cataloguer of courtly infractions. "His shadow feels longer, his cough more frequent in the corridors I frequent." They stood for a few moments, bathed in the dim light filtering through a high, grimy window. It was not a romantic embrace, no stolen kiss, no passionate declaration. It was a shared moment of grim honesty, a mutual acknowledgement of the impossible odds they faced. Their love was not a soaring melody, but a low, resonant hum of shared understanding, a quiet fortitude born of necessity. This was their truest intimacy, the ability to articulate, in hushed tones, the mundane horrors of their existence, and to find solace in the shared burden. "I found a passage," Erin whispered, his eyes scanning the empty corridor, "in an ancient chronicle of the Order of St. Gregory. It spoke of the invisible threads that bind to souls, stronger than any visible chain, enduring even in the deepest dungeons." It felt appropriate. Winifred felt a warmth spread through her chest, a profound comfort. It was his way of saying, "I am here, I see you. We are bound." She gave him a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "I shall seek out the tale of the invisible threads," she replied, her voice soft but steady, conveying her understanding and appreciation. "Perhaps it will inspire a new pattern in my work." Their time was almost up. A faint sound, a distant creak of a door jolted them. They exchanged one last, lingering glance, a deeper, more profound version of their initial fading gaze. It was a look that contained volumes, shared fear, enduring connection, and the quiet, desperate hope that their ingenuity would continue to outwit the suffocating world around them. Aaron gave a quick, almost imperceptible bow, as if dismissing himself from a casual encounter, and retreated into the dim depths of the scriptoria. Winifred, her heart still thrumming, turned and continued on her feigned errand to the physician's quarters, the imaginary herbal book still clutched in her hand. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. The invisible threads would become a new, vital motif in her tapestry, a testament to the unyielding bond between them, woven into the very fabric of their hidden lives. The winter deepened, and the court remained a crucible of watchful eyes and suffocating routine. Their clandestine network of subtle signals, coded messages, and veiled conversations became more intricate, more daring. The tapestry in Winifred's chambers grew, a masterpiece of silent defiance, its threads imbued with her every unspoken thought. The wilder rose, the resilient fern, the intertwined ivy, and now the nascent pattern of invisible threads, all were meticulously woven, each stitch a testament to endurance. Aaron, meanwhile, became an unparalleled master of the scriptoria's vast collection. He knew every shelf, every dusty tome, every loose page. He used the very tedium of his duties as a cloak, burying complex messages within dry administrative reports or embedding them in the pagination of rarely consulted historical accounts. The risk was constant, the effort immense, but the occasional, fleeting moment of connection, the profound relief of knowing he was understood, made it bearable. Their forbidden love was not a dramatic rebellion against the system. It was a slow burn of quiet endurance within it. There were no moonlit rendezvous, no whispered vows under the stars. There was only the calculated maneuver of a shared glance, the precise timing of a dropped ledger, the hidden meaning in a discussion about agricultural yields. The stakes were not just grand tragedy, but the mundane ruin of a family's standing, a swift banishment, or worse, the soul-numbing consequence of forced separation, a life of quiet regret within monastic walls. They existed on the edges, too, figures moving through the courtly tapestry, almost invisible, their lives a testament to the grim, exhausting patience required to exist unseen in a world that simply had no room for genuine, unapproved feeling. Their love story was less about fiery passion and more about the quiet, unyielding strength of two souls clinging to a shared truth in an unromantic age. It was a love that found its depth not in grand gestures, but in the profound understanding, gleaned from the subtle shift of a tapestry, the knowing flicker of an eye across a crowded, indifferent hall. They had found their own, unglamorous, form of freedom, the freedom of two souls, unseen and unheard by the world, beating to their own quiet, resilient rhythm, together, enduring. Their lives would continue within the suffocating confines of Ethelberg Citadel, defined by duty and surveillance. There would be no escape, no dramatic elopement, no grand declarations. But within that tedium, they had forged something real, something that transcended the court's dull routine. A connection measured not in stolen kisses, but in shared silences, in the profound relief of being truly seen by another. It was a quiet rebellion, a testament to the enduring power of genuine feeling, even when confined to the smallest, most secret corners of a tightly controlled world. And in that quiet endurance, they found a satisfaction deeper than any fleeting romance could offer, a profound, enduring kinship against the backdrop of an unromantic age. Their story was the subtle strength of two hearts, beating quietly in unison, a whispered melody against the endless drone of the court, a quiet testament to their unyielding bond. Like and subscribe for more tales of quiet defiance in a world determined to silence true feeling.